Hey everyone, welcome to Big Blend Radio's Military Monday show. So this is every first Monday we get to chat with Mike Guardia. Mike is an award-winning author, a military historian, and a U.S. Army veteran. Today we're going to be talking about communication in the military. We're going to go to the Civil War. We're going to talk about the telegraph, Morse code, on Navajo, code talkers. Just how did this all go down? I know there was flags used in some places. Now, you got to think about the internet. The internet kind of really started in the military. And so
Mhm.
it's really kind of fascinating how communication happens to say, hey, watch out, something's coming your way, duck.
Yeah.
So everyone go to Mike's website, mikeguardia.com. Welcome back, Mike. How are you?
Hey, Lisa, Nancy, I'm doing great. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
Hey, yeah, we're excited about this because
Yeah.
communication,
Yeah.
like, there's a side of me, like, when they used to have those wars where they were marching towards each other, I don't
Right.
know if the flipping the bird was legal at that time or if they knew about it, but like
What?
there's a side of me that would just go like flip the bird at the person across from
Oh,
me and say, please
nice.
don't shoot me.
I thought you
So,
were going to talk about like the pigeons they used for
oh, I know
messaging.
that. No, that's another good point. Pigeons were used in
Yeah.
sending messages, but as flipping the bird ever, I've got to bring that up. I didn't even know I was going to bring that up until as soon as we started recording. I'm like, I want to bring out the bird. Has that ever been used in any form of communication? It's got to have
Oh,
been at
come
some point.
on.
Oh, well, gosh. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I can remember at the very least a handful of occasions where, the bird was used informally along with many other not so friendly hand gestures and informal communications amongst
Mm.
many of the soldiers I knew. So, yeah. So it's been around for quite a while. And, on the topic of hand gestures, it's funny that you should mention that because part of the cultural competency training that soldiers have been getting throughout the past 20 years or so include what gestures you can and cannot do if you're ever serving in a Middle Eastern country. And
Oh,
and oddly enough, things that we take for granted or things that have good connotations here in the States mean something entirely different when you get to
Mm.
the Far East or even to
Mm-hmm.
the Middle East. For instance, here in America, we interpret a thumbs up gesture as a sign of positivity, but in Eastern
yeah.
cultures, that's actually
Mm.
incredibly disrespectful. You also have to be mindful when you're greeting somebody not to do it with your left hand, but instead do it with your right hand,
Right.
since
Yeah.
since
Right.
left hand gestures are considered not to be appropriate given the context. And
Mm.
not only that, you were also encouraged not to show the bottom of your shoe to anybody because,
Oh,
showing the bottom of your shoe to anyone in Iraq or any of the Arab states for that matter is pretty much the equivalent of what the middle finger is to us. And
wow.
it,
Oh,
in a roundabout way, we found that out, I think accidentally, because if we wind the clocks back to the early 90s when we were in Somalia, and we had the Black Hawk helicopters who were patrolling these racetrack patterns over Mogadishu. The Rangers and the infantrymen who would travel aboard those helicopters would often travel with their feet hanging out the side of the helicopter. So when you look up and you see a helicopter with a bunch of soles of combat boots that are hanging off the side, and those soles are pointed down towards you, that right there is an interpretation like, oh, okay, well, these people are giving me the equivalent of the middle finger. And
wow.
Wow.
we didn't even mean anything by it. I mean, that's just typically how we traveled in helicopters at those times. If there was not adequate room, or even if there was adequate room, you would still, travel with your feet on the skids or they were hanging over the side. So yeah, it was one of those things that we kind of had to learn the hard way. And, I mean, the reasons for Somalia
Mm.
turning out the way that it did, I mean, there's many reasons out there as the day is long, but that cultural unawareness, I'll call it, certainly did not help our mission.
Wow,
It,
that's hard.
yeah.
I mean, because you're in a helicopter. That's how you do it, and at the same time, you're there to help, and it's like, because I know a lot of times, like in especially Afghanistan, right? It was, here's all this going on, and yet Afghanistan was also a lot of rebuilding, right? Wasn't it about also recreating villages and helping even put in, greenhouses and water systems and things like that? Am I wrong? Or like that's what I always thought was part of that, whereas like there's security, there was training, and then also doing these villages. So that was another important thing of like your communication needs to be there, right?
Right. And that's really what makes it hard for any operation not a conventional or a traditional shooting war. And
Okay.
because it's very well, okay, I will not say that it's easy. It's never really easy when you are at war in any capacity, but it seems to me that the shooting war, the art of maneuvering against the enemy, is the one part of the operation that doesn't require as many moving pieces as securing the civil structure afterwards. Because when the enemy surrenders, or the enemy eventually collapses under the onslaught of the firepower, how do you transition from becoming a warfighter into becoming a
Yeah, the adrenaline.
yeah.
I was thinking about that the other day about
And can you
adrenaline.
establish good ties with the communities?
Yeah, but even individually, how does a soldier go from that high octane? I shouldn't say octave. I'm in music land. Octane mode of adrenaline, right? To
Right.
suddenly, hey, now we're going to play peacekeeper, but I'm still keeping watch. So it's like it's a never-ending series of emotions to keep going. Yet you're with the people, so that obviously spurs you on too, because but to have that emotion of I'm here to, get you guys and shoot you down and all that, right?
Mhm.
And then at the same time, now let's go build a garden. Like, what the hell? it's
Yeah.
like it's like a little bit too much. I mean, is it the same people, or are we splitting? Are there two different people doing these things?
Well, a lot of the times it really is the same people who have just finished a shooting war who now have to
Wow.
switch gears and try to become peacekeepers. And
Mhm.
it's a shame, because you really can't transition that quickly from being a war fighter to being a peacekeeper within the context of the same operation. And it's funny you should mention that, because that reminds me of one of the Eagle Troop veterans that I interviewed for that book, The Fires of Babylon.
Mm.
One of the veterans whom I spent considerable time interviewing was a gentleman named Chris Hedenskog, and he was he was the tank driver for H.R. McMaster in that conflict, and he commented on that very same phenomenon. He said, we had just gotten to the tail end of what was the most horrific tank battle of the late 20th century. And, we had plowed through what was considered to be the best and brightest of Iraq's Republican Guard. And we had seen all this carnage happen in front of us. And to transition from that, we were still trying to process everything we had seen, to transition from that to having us be UN brokered peacekeepers on that line of demarcation, while Iraq was trying to sign the ceasefire treaty. It was something that we were not well equipped to handle. And you need to have a separate cadre that is geared towards that peacekeeping mission. You can't take the trigger puller and put them in a peacekeeping mission that quickly after the combat ceases, because he needs time to decompress. He needs time to be psychologically brought down from that level of the high octane action.
Yeah, and I think isn't it also about like fitness levels? Like sometimes doing a lot of fitness and jogging and lifting weights and all of that really helps get that out, like move it out of your system a little bit. Just
Right.
like It's almost like you have a new chemical. It is a chemical, right? Adrenaline and all of that is, you got to push that stuff out. I don't know anything about any kind of jogging or anything. You don't want to see that, but like
Mhm.
I mean, I do know from going on a hike or really getting out there that it can take all that that feeling, that kind of feeling. I can't say I've been in that, but I've been in scary stuff and stuff where I've
Right.
had to fight back
Mhm.
to know that adrenaline feel. There's no way. I mean, that's why people are like, I need a damn shot of whiskey or something at the end, like hell. But that's still not going to get you until you actually move your body. It feels like you need to get it out of your body. Like it almost like a 72 hour, maybe obviously longer, but there's something that I think we do produce chemicals in our body that have to get out,
Right.
you know, like we need an exorcism or something.
Well, it is a lot of it is a lot of adrenaline, which
Yeah.
goes to all your vital organs to
Right.
tell it
Yeah.
to stand up and get ready to fight or
Yeah.
flight. You're
Yeah.
either going to fight or run or play dead. I guess that would be an option. But you
Well,
know,
Nancy, you've seen that with animals. You don't mess with an
oh
animal
yeah,
that's just taken down unless they're eating. Once
Mm-mm.
they've made their kill and they're eating, then they're fine. Don't get near it. But
Yeah,
like if an animal's in that mode, you mess with that
Mm.
mode, you're done. You're out.
you're done.
You're done.
Interesting,
You know.
and then I was thinking too when we moved to Africa and we had a couple of like employees around the house, a gardener and such. And when you first started communicating with them, they would not look you in the eye, which made me feel like, what you're shifty, what's going on here? And it took me a
Yeah.
while to realize, oh, so they do that when they're talking to someone who they have decided is higher up because you're the employer, or
It's a
your wife,
it's
or
a feeling of
whatever.
respect. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're trying to show you respect. And my take on it was, what's up? What are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you're nervous because you're in a new country, and it was so odd that
Mm-hmm.
they
It's
wouldn't
weird.
they wouldn't look you in the eye, and I found that really
You have to
really
change.
disconcerting.
Yeah, you have. How do you when you think about this kind of
Mm.
communication, you have to change what you know, what you want to do for someone.
Yeah.
You want them to be
Mm.
comfortable, and everything you've been taught is the opposite.
Yeah.
I remember when Nancy had her
Mm.
magazine in South Africa, and I was 17 years old, went working for her right out of high school. But I mean, I was working for her before that, and she's like, "Oh, you want to go do ad sales? Well, you're going to go here." And oh boy, she hired a friend of mine's friend because he could drive me because at that point I wasn't even legal to drive, but I did drive, but no one knew.
Mm, mm,
Um,
mm, mm.
anyway, yeah, there was ways to drive down the sidewalks. Anyway,
Mhm.
so anyhow, I would go to a place, North Park in Port Elizabeth. At that point, was kind of industrial, but then there was also a very huge Muslim section. And
Mm.
you
Yeah.
want to get your chops done, you go into industrial parks and try and do ad sales, cold calling. Um, and also try to not be 17. And next thing I know, I'm in the Muslim area and I didn't care. And I actually went with Nasli, another sales rep. And
Sort of.
yeah, we went together, different person, because it was, yeah, it was just one of
It
those
was
days. I
funny.
remember going there and I don't even think you knew we went up that far. And
Mm-mm.
Nasli and I went in there and there's like specific prayer times. And no matter what's going on, everybody like drops to the floor and prays, basically, and it's okay to not be part of it, but you respect, right? And with
Mhm.
anybody's religion, if you're in their place, you respect it. But no matter what, Nasli could not get the time of day because she was Muslim.
Yeah.
But she was a female Muslim, but now I'm white Muslim. I mean, white, not Muslim. And so it was a different thing. But man, I think I made one or two sales and it took me 2 years. No
Well,
kidding.
you're second
I
class as a
mean,
woman
I
to
mean,
start
it
with.
took it and
So
it became a thing of, I'm not going to let it go. I'm going to keep learning, and you
yeah,
build relationships.
the
But it
African culture thrives on bargaining. That's what they
Yeah,
do.
and of course, in those in those places, it takes time. I mean,
Mm,
I have a friend
yep.
who lived in India, and she would buy rugs and clothing to bring here to the States and import it. But she would say, if you're going to buy anything, you spend all day in that tea shop drinking tea back and forth until
Yep.
you get the price you want. If you want to just pay top dollar, go ahead and do it. But if you spend the day and you know that's what you're doing, that's what you put as an investment because it's a back and forth and they end up friends afterwards. And that is the truth. I also did end up friends. And yeah, I mean, I was able to go places that most people couldn't because of time and I'm going to say to use the word patience only because a lot of people today don't have patience for cultivating
No kidding.
relationships long term.
Mhm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You don't go into like if I went in with my phone and started looking at my phone like we
Oh,
do
that's
now
rude.
today, I would
Mm-mm.
never have made it
Mm-mm.
at all. So I kind of that's where I can resonate with that a little bit. I mean, I'm not in a war situation, though it was pretty tenacious out there at that time. Um, so there's a there's a male female thing too. And so in the
Yep.
military communication, that has to be different too about
Mhm.
communication, whether it's a male or female with different cultures.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this was a big thing for the troops who were at the tail end of Desert Storm, where they had to transition into being peacekeepers, and they had to do a lot of civil patrols. But that also factored into the equation when we were assigned to a peacekeeping mission in Bosnia, and
Mm.
all of the dynamics that entailed, because the Serbs, the Croats, the Bosniaks, every ethnic group that you could find in the former Yugoslavia, they all had different cultural traits that would be defined by region. It would be defined by nationality, and not only that, you would also have religion, because you had Muslim
Mhm.
Serbs, and they did things differently than the Croats did. And even more so, in the wars that we fought in the aftermath of 9/11, it was a very big swath of the DoD budget to provide all of these cultural trainings for our troops who are going overseas, because hey, it's a completely different culture. When you talk to a
Mhm.
lady, this is what you have to do. When you here are some things to consider. And then you also had these female engagement teams where you had female translators and female intel operatives going with these units in the field, specifically for the purpose of interacting with females who could have information on enemy troop
Ooh.
movements. Because they weren't allowed to talk to the men, and if the men tried to
Mhm.
approach the women, then you make an
Yep.
enemy out of the local tribal chief, and he
Dude,
could have been a good ally, but now you've just pushed him over into the enemy camp.
don't underestimate the women ever in these situations because I mean
Funny.
seriously, and they're also badasses. There's like I wouldn't mess. No.
One
Mm-mm.
of my first experiences in Kenya was trying to open a bank account, and all the guy kept saying was, "But madam, where's your husband?" I'm like, I don't have one. But madam,
She went in the
go
street
get
and grabbed
one.
a white guy, the first
Yeah,
white
so
guy
I
she
went
could
in the
find,
street and I found
and
this
she had to
white guy,
wait
and
a
he turned
while
out,
because this is in the
yeah, well,
70s, everyone.
yeah, so
Mhm.
he turned out to be a lawyer, which was really cool. And I brought him inside, and he managed to, without lying, get the bank account open. It was really funny. I
And
was
then he
like,
told
oh my
Nancy
gosh.
she needs to go back home to America, but she ended up working for him.
Yeah,
But
he hired me. That was funny. But it it's so like staunch, at least it was back then, that there was no question about, there was no way you're going to change anybody's mind about anything.
mhm. Yeah, this
It
sentence,
was a done deal. This is how it is.
and
Either
that's that. You're in
do
that
it their way
country.
or get out.
It's different though for military, I think, and also during a war, like you were
Mm.
saying, and after 9/11, that was a big shakeup. And do you, I mean, where? I don't know if I should ask this, but I'm going to, and you can tell me to never ask it again. But how close are like the CIA and the FBI with the military in regards to communication of when
Ooh.
stuff is going down? I know I shouldn't ask that, or can I? I mean, I
Well,
don't know.
I if I if I had a high enough pay grade in the military to be able to tell you, I would. But all I heard at my level, at the company grade level, was that well, I know that there were operations involving the FBI and the CIA. I know that there was sharing of information. I mean, shoot, we even had a joint task force headquarters that was shared, that that the Army shared with the Department of Homeland Security and INS, out in El Paso, using using DoD resources to interdict
Oh
a lot of
yeah,
the drug cartels. So I know that
yeah.
there's information that gets passed amongst all those agencies, in any operation overseas, and any yeah, any overseas garrison that we have. You're
Hmm.
always going to have a few CIA spooks running around sharing information, with the G2 cells. How well that information is shared and how often it's shared, and whether the left hand talks to the right hand as well as they should, I really don't know.
Well, it's interesting too because there's so many like different like you were saying, the word operative is such a cool
Yeah.
word. Like that,
Mhm.
whenever you read that in a novel, you're like, ooh, stuff went
Mm.
down,
Yeah.
something's up, you know. But when you think you think about also like the Navy SEALs going out, and I had like when a boss at one time who was a Navy SEAL, actually a couple of people I worked with that were Navy SEALs, and
Mhm.
the one, well, he was Cherokee. One,
Yeah,
Carl, you worked with him.
it's
Um,
crazy.
he was Cherokee and worked, and he was in Navy SEAL, and one of the very few people in like that we've ever met that could walk up behind us and us not know.
Oh no, my gosh.
What he's
One day,
rare. It's rare. It's
remember
really
when he got on the roof?
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
he would
I mean, it was
he
crazy.
would sabotage our house. He'd come home and he would be inside somewhere or hanging somewhere or doing something insane.
Yeah.
And um he he was kind of like a crazy badass. And
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, this was in 94,
Yeah.
95 that we
He
knew him.
he would
And
he would get on the roof, and as you walked outside, he'd jump down behind you from the roof of the house,
and
and
you didn't see him.
you wouldn't hear him. You could
Yeah.
feel, hey,
I
wait a
mean, I'm
minute, I
wondering like,
felt something.
yeah, he
It
was
was
like
so scary,
so I
so
wonder about like
creepy.
communication with that kind of
Mhm.
level of Navy SEAL sniper level, like because he
He was
was like
crazy.
silent and he was the sweetest guy, but I always looked at him like, I
Like,
don't ever want to mess with you. Like,
you don't.
I'm
No,
never
no,
gonna
no, no,
win.
no,
I'll never win against you. Like for
no.
whatever you're doing, uh-uh.
And he was
And
smart.
so yeah, what do you think, Mike, with that? Like that kind of is communication when you're being silent, like the other Navy SEAL I knew, Ben, he did a lot of like actual underwater mission stuff. And he was like, they're underwater. And that was in the same time frame. This is in the mid 90s. And he like they had communication underwater. So what was going on with these guys? Like how do you talk when you have to be quiet? How do you
Well,
signal to each other?
well, a lot depends on the ambient light. There are hand and arm signals,
Hmm.
that I learned as a soldier to communicate different things. There was also yeah, there were also certain devices that you could use. There were certain ciphertexts, and for operations where you had to be on radio silence, normally you had what was called a blue force tracker, and that could at least give you situational real time awareness of where all your elements were on the battlefield at any given moment. And
Hmm.
if voice is inevitable, a lot of the radio systems that we use have what's called a whisper function. It's a dial that you turn on the radio apparatus itself, and you can essentially whisper into the microphone, and then on the receiving end, it's amplified to the amount of decibels that would be needed if you were hearing somebody talk in a normal voice only
Wow.
a few feet away from you.
Wow. Now, if I ever had one of those, it would be really dangerous. I'd
That's
be like,
cool.
hey, big boy. Just be careful. I'd be whispering all kinds of stupid stuff I shouldn't, just for the fun of it, but you can't do that in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
Come on, you guys have to have some humor partway
Oh,
through,
of
right?
course. Oh, of
Okay,
course.
so it's not just me that immediately goes. That's
It's like
Nancy.
MASH.
Nancy and
MASH.
I want CB radios we want a
Oh,
CB
gosh.
radio on the road because we want to say hi to the truckers that are the good truckers, that do help you through situations at times. And we just want one and just go, yeah, hey, big boy, I suppose I shouldn't be saying, hey, big boy on
No, I don't
anywhere.
think so, Lisa.
But no, I mean, but I'm also fascinated by how that changed because it's like ham radios. Weren't ham radios at one point part of military? Like, I got to go back to
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember like my friends' dads having them and grandfathers, and like I'd be out there playing with my friends, going, "I actually want to go hang out with your your old man," kind of thing, and just go, play ham radio and now look where
Hey,
we
rubber
are doing.
ducky.
Well, now look at us doing internet radio and Zoom, and I mean, whoever thought it would be this now? I didn't think that when I was a kid, but that kind of thing. Even my step granddad was in Guernsey during the occupation when the Nazis invaded the Channel Islands between England and France, and they try to take everything, including his radio, but he hid his radio, and he managed to hook this up and make his own batteries and make it run so he could hear what was going on in Russia and in other countries, which I think is pretty badass.
Yeah.
He was like, he could do his own radio stuff.
Mhm.
So, like, that's pretty crazy. And so that brings me to even the very first reason of why we're having this show today is when you were on the show talking about the Normandy landings for it was our second D-Day show. And you were talking about one of the men in one of your latest books, The Combat Diaries. Everyone, by the way, Mike, it's 25 books. Am I right this time?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
There you go. Yay.
I get a lucky star. The Combat Diaries, True Stories from the Front Lines of World War II. I love this book, but you shared a story on that. And would you mind repeating it for those who may not have heard it? Because I still want to hear it again. It's so cool. But that's what sparred like this whole, like, hey, let's get this, or I should say get this. I'm just excited about it, like how communication happens in battles. And that's why we're doing this podcast topic today.
Yeah. So this is the story about a gentleman named Bill Smith, and he was a young lieutenant at the time. He was a young field artillery officer, and specifically, he was what you call a forward observer. And in technical terminology, that makes him a fire support officer. So he is going to be the lead element out there who is coordinating offshore artillery support to prep the beaches at Normandy. And several hours before the main force of the invasion arrived on Normandy Beach, he had Bill Smith, who was out there several hours before. This was in the pre-dawn hours, where he essentially wades ashore in something that can only be described as a slightly bigger floating apparatus than a tire's inner tube, and armed with nothing more than his sidearm, map, and a small, and a small little glow in the dark light. He's able to feel his way around the beach in the darkness.
Wow.
And at several points throughout the pre-dawn hours, he's calling in artillery fire from offshore onto the German defenses on the beach. And it just goes to show how important that communication is, and how much of a priority that the Allied command placed on maintaining the radio equipment. Because he was even told by one of his instructors before he went off out into the night that, hey, we can, if anything else, guard this radio with your life, because we can replace a second lieutenant, but we can't replace one of these expensive radios.
Nice.
And so while while he's using this handheld radio as the only source of communication that he has to all of these offshore batteries, he's able to call in, he's able to adjust fire, he's able to do pinpoint strikes on these German positions. And what gives you an added sense of just how urgent and how critical this mission was, and really how dangerous it was. I remember him saying that when the first volleys fell on the German positions in the pre-dawn hours, the searchlights of their watchtowers lit up and they started scanning the beach, because the Germans knew that if they were getting offshore artillery fire that was this accurate, then there had to have been an Allied spotter somewhere on the beach.
Yeah.
And he said, good thing I was able to hide under a piling of rocks, because those searchlights, they crisscrossed over me a number of times. And every single time that they glided over my head, all they saw was the rocks. They never, thought that, hey, underneath that rock piling is probably where the spotter is.
Dude,
Scary.
dude, that's messed up. Like, I'm just saying, to be out there and they're going around, and yet you're holding onto this radio, but it was him that let people know where to land on Normandy Beach, right?
Yeah, well, they already knew generally where they were going. His big job was to just make sure that he registered all of the offshore gunfire to soften up the defenses as much as he could.
Wow.
And it was quite an impressive experience for him, and also one that was very heartrending too, because finally, after the sun came up and all of the main body forces from the 1st Infantry Division came across shore, on Omaha Red Beach. After the firing had stopped and the beachhead was secure, only then did he emerge from his hiding place. And now that the sun was fully high in the sky, he could see all of the carnage in front of him. And he just said that one of the hardest things in his life was seeing the bodies of his fellow troopers, just floating there in the surf. And he said, "My God, we got a toehold on the continent, but man, it's such a high cost, and I pray for the souls for all of these guys." And it was already a poignant moment for him, because at that point in the war, he had already lived about twice as long as the average life expectancy for a forward observer should have been.
Wow. That, this is, I mean, in World War II, we didn't think we were going to get World War II after World War I, but we learned a lot from World War I, right? So did that help in his communication to be able to have, that's just still badass, right? But did that help him have and the military and the force then, everybody there involved, have that communication? Did that come from learning from World War I, do you think?
Well, the tactical communication and those systems themselves, I think, really did come from World War I. They reinforced a lot of the lessons that we had to learn through trial and error, and things that we got from the fellow allies before we came in towards the end of the war. But just really stressed the need for having really tight communication, and not only that, having the need for instant communication, because trench warfare changed the face of war so much at that point. And you really went from a maneuver-based concept of warfare where you could communicate different commands and you could communicate different ideations through a series of horn blasts and trumpet blasts and also drum rolls. And you would have these different relay stations at points along the battlefront who would relay those signals, through any number of successive bugle calls. But now that everything had gone static and you were in this trench-based form of warfare, you had to get instant communications from one point to another, and you had to do it silently. Well, that was where the telegraph really saw a much more widespread use than it had previously. And not only that, you also had radio communications come into their own right around this time. I mean, nothing to the extent that you would have seen in World War II, but, being able to transmit real-time voice messages across
Wow.
across a very large swath of the battlefront was something that was not only revolutionary, but at the same time, all of the competing militaries were trying to find ways to listen in on the other person's traffic, and that gave rise to all the different operational security measures that communications have today, like ones that are able to hop from one frequency to another automatically so that the enemy can't listen in. Things that communications that are sent with multiple layers of encryption, so that it's very, very hard to hack in on any of the radio traffic.
Well, that's really interesting when you go back to that and how we, when we first started our radio show on Blog Talk Radio, which we're not there anymore. We've moved platforms, but we're on everything though. All main platforms, everyone, just just to be positive here. But we started there, and they were one of the first where you could call in and be online, and it was the only one really that you could do, and do live. And I mean, even our sound effects, you couldn't really do half of what. I mean, it was still a very organic grassroots project, but it was frigging cool to do. And so then it grew, and it was like probably the third year, and we're talking about 16, 17 years ago when we started this. It's crazy. We were in it 6 months in, and this was before the word podcast was really there yet. And we're doing all this, and we're like, this is the coolest thing on the planet. That's what led us from being Southwest blend to being, hey, we're global. We're talking to winemakers. We're talking to people all around the world. Screw this. Why not? And it was weird because it was about the third, fourth year in where the bots came in, and these DDoS or DDS server attacks happened, and they would happen during shows. I mean, we got blasted from what's that, Westboro Baptist Church attacked us once. We've had
bottom boys.
We had all these things happen to us during shows that they would attack us, and it became very weird. And your numbers, you couldn't really believe your listenership numbers, because they would just fluctuate out of like insanity in like, come on, I know it's still like a new phenomenon at that time, but no. And so it was a very weird thing, but so there, and it's still a very interesting thing where we're at today with it, because the internet is still not 100%. I mean, look at it, and look at TikTok, right? That's another thing I was going to say. Like, TikTok is a weird thing of what we're all talking about now, and the government's looking at it because of China and all that stuff. It's kind of a and people getting ransomed and hijacked and whatever all those words are, that are just like, hey, I've got your website and I'm going to take it until you pay me things. So isn't that kind of similar from then? Like, if you think we've just got into a different platform in a way.
Yeah, and it's kind of alarming to see how quickly some very motivated hackers and IT specialists can find workarounds and find ways through all of these security measures. Cyber warfare is something that goes on every day, and it doesn't get. I don't think it gets even nearly half the press coverage that it should. But it represents such a clear and present danger. And you have cyber attacks, you have cyber defenses, and it's going on. It's going on and on every side of the issue. Every side of the geopolitical divide. And you just have to wonder, okay, well, is it going to get to a point where one is going to overtake the other, and warfare will spell the end of any viable network? Is it going to get to a point where all somebody has to do is press a button, and then suddenly every viable network in the continental US collapses? Planes fall out of the sky, and and these smart cars with the drive-by wire functions, suddenly suddenly
Yeah,
go
suddenly.
offline and they go haywire, and then they all start crashing into these brick walls or these barricades or whatever? Or is it going to get to a point where, you have like
Well,
Terminator or Rise of the Machines and
yeah,
everything's smart?
but then listen, I want the Back
Mm.
to the Future car. I'm with you on that, by the way.
Yeah,
Just saying.
of course.
But this is how weird we've gone political on it in this country,
Uh-huh.
which is kind of a shame.
Well,
Instead of actually
course.
looking at, hey, to me, like when Y2K was going to happen,
All right.
the whole
gosh.
band, I remember that, and I was just like, dude, we
It's
had
so
our
funny.
band, we had a gig out in the desert. We were like, let's see what happens. I was like, hey, I know how to, do things. I don't need the computer stuff to do things. And we were so not computerized like we are now. And that was, I think it was the beginning of the .com, you know, hey, we can do all this, which, I still believe we can do so many cool things with the internet. But it's about like, whenever there's an opportunity for the criminal, right?
Right.
The opposition. And so that's kind of the problem we have. And so we don't want to be regulated. All of us don't want to be regulated, but if you don't have regulation, how are they going to keep things safe? It's like such a
Right.
weird,
You need
mass of
regulation. You
drama,
always
and
have to have
everybody
it.
politically everyone politically are arguing, and I'm going, but you're actually arguing against yourself. Those who want freedom of everything actually
No,
really
that
wanted to
doesn't
all be
work.
protected. And then I'm like, come on, people, you're not
Right.
actually yeah,
Mm.
it doesn't make
And
sense.
that's kind of what I've told my students in years past. I said, one of the biggest things about the American experiment is that we're always trying to recalibrate and trying to find that right balance between individual freedom and
Mhm.
order, individual freedom and what's good for the collective, what is good for the
Mm.
collective health of society. And the analogies that I give, as I say, okay, well, let's think of it as a spectrum. On one end, you have total freedom, and then on the other end, you have total control. Well, you don't want too much freedom, because if you have too much freedom, then it leads to anarchy and it becomes like the
Right.
Wild West, and you have a failed state, kind of like Somalia, where
Mhm.
everybody is just doing whatever they want. Everybody's offing everybody
Yeah.
else. And then you have the rise of these
Yeah.
warlords who pretty much, just take control, and people gravitate towards strongmen. But if you have too much order, you become a police state, kind of like North Korea. So how do you
Yeah.
find that delicate
Yeah.
balance in between? How do you find that Goldilocks zone to say
Mm.
that, okay, well, it's the right amount of personal freedom, but at the same time, I got the right amount of control so that everything does not devolve into chaos and anarchy?
I think it's called education on all levels. It's education and how do I put this?
Well, you're talking to
More,
an educator, Nancy.
yeah, it's education, number one, and moral education.
Mhm.
Because that's why I love history, because when you read history and you see what people did, you can make up your mind, well, that was the right thing to do, or that wasn't the right thing to do, but you can understand why it was done. Whether you liked what they did or not, you start to learn how people's behavior changes because of history, because of what happened in the past. So we're still evolving, to get to the point where we don't harm each other. We're not greedy
Mhm.
or selfish. And I'm not talking communism, so please don't email me about that. And because every time you talk that way, people start thinking, oh, you want to share everything with everybody and everybody should be equal. I'm not talking about communism. I'm talking about being human,
Yeah.
the good part of being human.
Well, I actually think what you're also saying, Nancy, also goes back to the military, where I think people forget the other side of what the military does. Like we were talking about in the beginning with Afghanistan, how much the military does in rebuilding. And
Oh, yeah.
it's
Yeah.
forgotten. People go, why are we keep paying these places? There's no war there anymore.
It's not only, whenever there's a disaster, the
Yeah, the
forces
military
are there.
Yeah. I mean, you've got, your National Guard is like right there. But honestly, I think there's so many roles of the military, and that is important, because whenever there's a drama, security has to happen. I don't care if it's a wildfire. I don't care if it's a hurricane, if it's a national disaster like that, or it's a war. Whenever something has to be rebuilt, you need security.
Yep.
Period. Wouldn't you agree, Mike? You're in that
Yeah.
world. It's true. You can't. You have to have that. You have to have both. You can't just go, okay, I'm playing Susie Homemaker today. That doesn't work because someone's going to do
No.
something stupid.
Mhm.
Because
Right.
it's whenever there's rebuilding, that again, it's that opportunity, right, Mike? Isn't that kind of
Yeah.
that weird thing? Whenever there's opportunity,
Well, it's not even rebuilding. It's like even when we were in the fires in Julian, um, people's houses were being looted during the fires. And the firemen were like going crazy, trying to round everything up, put barriers against the fires, get the people out of the way. And then you had people sneaking into other people's homes looting. So it was like, on the firemen,
that was a
it's,
very small portion,
yeah,
but yeah, it did
but
happen.
still, it did happen. But
And in a
it,
cozy little Mayberry town, you know what I mean?
yeah.
But
Mhm. Where you,
Mike, yeah, this is that thing too. Like when we talk about communication, like when Nancy and I went through all those fires, and it was a lot of them, and a
yeah.
lot of shifting, and a lot of weird stuff went down.
Mhm.
And so Nancy and I could just not even 100% look at each other. There was almost to a point of like, I can actually tell you what Nancy is doing right now in the other room and I can't see her. That kind of communication. Do you get like that in the military where you guys are so side by side and get to know each other, good, bad, and the ugly, right?
Oh yeah.
That you actually know each other's maneuvers and
Habits. Habits.
movements, even
Yeah.
movements, right?
Yeah. Well, we can anticipate each other's moves and
Yeah.
even at time finish each other's sentences. Yeah.
Yep.
Isn't that kind of where sports goes too? How
Yeah.
sports have
Absolutely.
teamwork happens. It's like, oh, this person always moves to the right before he moves left. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yep.
It's like
A
there's
fly always flies backwards before it goes forward. It's so
Henry
weird.
Ford says, whenever you have a bad day, remember the airplane had to take off backwards to go forwards.
Mhm.
He didn't say it
And he
exactly
got
like
it
that.
from the fly.
Remembering. Yeah, he
And I'm
did.
not
He did.
talking about the fictional character. I'm talking
Seth.
about real flies fly backwards just a little bit before they can go forward. It's weird.
Hey, The Fly is one of the best movies ever. Come on, Mike, you've seen it. Come on, wasn't that an 80s,
Oh,
90s movie?
oh, of
Oh
course, with
gosh.
Jeff Goldblum. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, just making sure. Just making sure. Got to check in there. Okay, so I want to go back, way back to the Civil War
Okay.
Yeah.
because we mentioned we want to talk about. I want to talk. We want to bring in. This is my way of bringing in the Navajo code talkers too. Um, so I think I told you after we recorded the last episode when we did the Road to Independence of America, right?
Mhm.
Which you gave me a really good history lesson. I think you gave a lot of people a good history lesson. That was brilliant. And I told you about that. Nancy and I had gone to this Civil War site in Oklahoma, Honey Springs battlefield, and I was like, oh, I'm so cool. This is so cool because we were in their visitor center, this brand new visitor center, and I photographed. They had all of these displays about communication and different flags meant different things. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think of flags, like duh, you know. But now beyond the flags, this Civil War was like the Civil War, many people don't ever think of Oklahoma or the Southwest having a Civil War. And it did happen. It went all the way to San Diego. I'm just saying, we lived outside not Butterfield. Oh gosh, it was outside Ramona. Oh, I'll think of it later when I'm supposed to. There's actual historic site there of where the Civil War was fought. Even Arizona, Fort Bowie was very instrumental even in the end of the Civil War because of the California column coming across and the Bascom affair. Anyway, Oklahoma, this site, Honey Springs, is insane because you've got all these families around and you had families fighting each other from different sides, white on white, black on black, Indian on Indian, separating. How the heck? I mean, so when you think about it, families fighting each other, I mean, in that battle, right there in their own turf, the communication has got to be bizarre. Like, you can wave all your flags, your cousin over there, you already know your cousin, you played, games with him or whatever it was, that's got to be, did you think that would you go to, I mean, does it move so fast that you don't get to read the other person across the field? Or, and I walked some of those battlefields and that's where I got ticks. But anyway, just saying, spray yourself down before you do it. And do walk it. It's worth it. It's a huge property with huge, a lot of hiking trails and stuff. But when I was thinking even of when this battle went down in the summer there, I was like, holy cow, you guys were sweating bullets, literally, and having to dodge bullets. The communication has to be really weird in the Civil War beyond the flags, if you know someone on the other side.
Yeah, and it's one of those aspects of war that doesn't really get a lot of attention, and I think would make for a very interesting psychological case study if they were to really dig deeper into it. But even if you have these units as large as, I would say, a regimental level, you've trained together so much that when you finally get to game day, you're so in sync, and you've gone through the drills so much, and even if something either physically or metaphorically gets in your way, you know how to adapt to it, because you know how they say no plan survives first contact, or even as Mike Tyson says, hey, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, because you've trained together for so long and you've built those bonds for so long, you're able to anticipate how the other folks in your unit will improvise to something on the cuff. And even when even if you have that same type of connection with somebody on the other side of the fence, maybe someone who's on the Confederate side, it makes for, I think, a very interesting case study, because they say that some of the easiest battles to fight are when your enemy is clear, it's defined, and it's predictable. And I think nothing could be more true in the case of the Civil War, since the officer corps and the training cadres all came out of the same schools of American military thought. So it was basically like fighting a twin brother for 4 years, and just the question of which of these two identical twins are going to run out of steam, or going to reach the point of exhaustion first, because they're both throwing the same jabs, they're both throwing the same right crosses and the same left hooks and uppercuts, and they can time each other's sequences. So it really just becomes a matter of who cries uncle first, and in that case, it was the South.
Wow.
Wow. It's Santa Anna, and having his men let's just walk into the bullets. I mean, come on. Seriously.
Well, but that's in war. The adrenaline will do a whole bunch. That's what I was talking about, those chemicals at the beginning.
Really, I mean, and then the people just got shot, following, and then the guys behind step over the one who just fell down.
Oh man, the Alamo was bad. That was brutal, man. The Alamo was just it was a bloodbath. It was crazy. I mean, that really, but going back to that with people understanding each other, it is fascinating to me. Having that split side and understanding each other, and what you're saying about understanding that improvisation when a plan doesn't go through, because you have your plan because that's kind of giving you the foundation, and then everything changes, right? It's no matter what, right? In anything we do in life, that's the way it is.
You need A, B, C, and D.
You're going to go. You're going to go apply for a job. You go, this is how it's going to be. I'm going to do this, do that. And as soon as you get there, it's not anything you thought. You're like, oh
Yeah.
crap, man. Well, then you just have to, you pick up from what you've already developed in your mind and your plan. You have to have that foundation. It's the same thing as a band, Mike, you know, being in music, it's like you get up on stage and someone like just totally screws up somewhere, which
Kidding.
it always does. Something's going to happen, or someone like a mic goes out or something goes out. You have to improvise right there and then, and a band has those looks at each other. They already know who, and it's not like anybody says you need to look at so and so, and you need, like, normally the bass player and the drummer is like they're the
Oh,
foundation
boy.
of the house, right? The
Mhm.
front person, the lead singer, lead guitarist, they're out the front, and then when something starts to fall in the back, oh, you better believe, holy hell, like that's it. You got to stand front. You've got to stay front. You can't look back. If it's going down, you better stand front and do whatever you can do. People on the side, you can try and look at them, but there's this looking game of no one can teach. It's not taught. It's a natural form of communication, and you do have your buddies that you can rely on to look at to know. Oh no, this person over here is being like no. You know what I mean? Like you it's a
I have
weird,
to say,
it's like we're all little monkeys out there, and don't get mad at me for saying that, people, but
no,
it
but
is. It's like we're little tribes, and we
I
have our
have to
people.
say about the band when the drummer got mad at the rhythm guitarist,
Yeah.
and he got up in the middle of a performance on the stage in the town that we were living in and said, "I'm going to take these drumsticks and shove them up your nostril."
He watched
And,
the movie The Commitments
and
because it
yeah,
was a
and
direct
so
pick.
they started to fight, and the audience stood up and they were like laughing and clapping because they thought it was an act. They really thought it was an act, and we're like,
It
"Oh boy,
wasn't. We were done, and
no,
the
it
bass player went
wasn't."
on the floor laughing. Nancy and the bass player, but
I know it was
well,
funny as
I
heck.
kept going, but no, but that's the thing where you keep there's this weird thing of synergy of being able to look at each other, but like people are also sight deprived, and they get a feeling too. We have a sixth sense. I really believe we do. I'm not trying to get woo woo here on a military show, but I
Of course
think
you
that if
have a
you don't
sixth
dig down
sense.
into that sixth sense, you're not going to make
Mhm.
it through anything. And that's really just about our capabilities of stretching what we have. What would you say, Mike? I mean, you're the one who's, in the military, understands everything on that level and been through it. Not us. We've just had weird life experiences. But that sixth sense, man, I'm hanging on to that. You
Yeah,
know?
and and I think in a lot of ways, getting that sixth sense is an acquired skill.
Mhm.
I think it's latent in almost everyone, but when you're in the culture and you're in the organization long enough and you start to adapt to the culture and you take on all those cultural practices on a metaphysical level, it changes your way of thinking and almost puts you in sync with everyone else who's working towards the same goal and same mission. And when you know how all those dynamics play out and how the organization works and how it functions as a whole, uh, it makes it that much easier to be able to anticipate those problems and see those potential catch points before they ever really materialize.
Yeah.
Now, see, if you go out in nature and you study animals and watch what they do, then you get a real sense of a sixth sense, where
Yeah.
it comes from, and it's experience.
Well, martial arts teaches you that too. It's about
Mhm.
focusing and centering and
Yeah.
breathing and being clear. Martial arts is great for that, man. I mean, come on. You know, Jean-Claude Van Damme will tell you. He
Right.
knows. Just saying. Hey, and listen, Karate Kid too. I still love Karate Kid. Did you see
Of
the
course.
second one?
Gosh.
Did you see the second one?
See the
I haven't
second.
Karate Kid, that whatever, it came out a
Mm.
few years ago or something. I haven't
Yeah,
Yeah,
seen it.
so
long
I
I
can't
time
saw the
ago.
remember.
original trilogy, the ones with Ralph Macchio, and
Yeah, I saw the original. Yeah, but
yeah,
then like
and
the ones they remade now, like
oh yeah, the Cobra Kai.
Is it
Yeah.
good? Should we
So I've
watch
seen a
it?
few episodes, and yeah, I mean, it is really good.
Oh, okay.
It's actually a very good story arc too, because when Cobra Kai first opened up, I think for its first season, you see that the characters have morphed and changed over time, because you have Daniel LaRusso, and he's this high powered car dealership owner, and he's kind of become a little pompous and arrogant. But then you have Johnny, who is unmistakably looking for redemption, and you really see a deeper
Wow.
Johnny Lawrence than you did in the original trilogy. And
Wow.
and also to add to the intrigue, you have Elizabeth Shue and Martin Cove also revising their characters.
Oh, and they're in there. Oh, they're still in
Yeah,
there? No. Okay,
yeah,
I'm gonna have to do it. Just I have to go back to my my old school days and rewatch this because I was like always like, no, they're gonna mess it up. But anyway, going back to communication, if we do not bring up the Navajo code talkers, we're all gonna get upset because this
okay.
is interesting. So can you explain that? Because we all know, okay, the Navajo, we have been to the memorial Veterans Memorial in Gallup, New Mexico. And so a lot of that history is documented in northern New Mexico from our experience. But Mike, can you give us an overview of how that all happened? Because even when you think about communication, and even when I was talking about that Civil War battle, we talked about the Battle of New Orleans, the last episode, and many, many episodes before that, because I can't stop talking about it. But I always
Right.
find it interesting when Native Americans will side with us, you know, and even buffalo soldiers, here we are, we're bringing slaves into this country, and then can you please fight with us, you know so that's a level of communication that has to happen, obviously.
Right.
And then next we have the Navajo code talkers that tell everybody about them.
Okay. Yeah, so I will preface it by saying that World War II was actually was a very good PR opportunity for the Native American community as a whole, because you had a lot of the Native Americans who were drafted off of the reservations, and you had a good number of Native Americans who also who also volunteered from the reservations, and they did not serve in segregated units. They were fully racially integrated to serve alongside the white soldiers. And aside from them getting that good spot of PR, you also had some very high-profile American Indians, such as Ira Hayes, who achieved fame as one of the flag raisers on Iwo Jima. He was a full-blooded Pima Indian, and aside from that, you had some Navajo tribesmen who were able to use their native language as a naval code in the Pacific Theater towards the end of that Pacific War. And it was very interesting in the sense that this was the only naval code that the Japanese were never able to break. They were never able to decipher it. And part of the reason being is because, the Navajo language itself did not have any specific vocabulary terms that were used to describe military machines, much less modern military machines. So you had different, you essentially had a list of metaphors that were applied to each one of the operations that the Navajo were assigned to, and yet all of these metaphors would correspond to different military commands. They would describe different operations, different maneuvers, and stuff like that. And when you strung them all together, you could create a very clear picture on the receiving end of what the message was intended to be and what command it was trying to relay. And given that you had that layer of built-in encryption, just by virtue of the linguistics itself, made for a code that really drove the Japanese high command nuts. You know, they
Yeah.
they spent so much time thinking to themselves, okay, of all the codes that we've had to deal with and every one that we've broken so far, what is this gibberish? It doesn't sound anything like
Mhm.
American English. It doesn't even sound like British English. What the heck are they talking about? Yeah,
Mm.
and because you would also have differences in the pronunciations and the intonations, it made it even harder for the Japanese to be able to decipher. And the fact that you could take an indigenous language and peg it to something that was so critical for an Allied victory in the Pacific Theater was just an incredible windfall to the Native American community as a whole. And I think it really did a lot to, and I'm not saying that Native American relations were bad before, but it just made it that much better afterwards.
Yeah.
It and
Elevated.
right,
And it was-
elevated the status.
and Harry Truman was purported to say to Ira Hayes when he and the other Iwo Jima flag raisers visited the White House. He was purported to say, "Ira, you're more American than any of us."
Oh,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
That's why he's my favorite
That's-
president.
Oh, here we go. And we drove by his site the other day.
I know.
Give him hell, Harry.
That's it.
Oh, I know. Yeah, well, but that's the thing is so many people have fought in wars in our country on our own land and then also the other wars, and people had to come together that were supposed to be fighting each other to fight those wars. So I think when that kind of thing happens, when you're in those extreme, situations, you do have to form a kinship and find a way to communicate because languages were also a barrier. Accents are a barrier, even,
Mhm.
So it's an interesting thing on that. So when you think also going back, we were using pigeons too. We had Morse code.
Mhm.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
that was the Morse code. We can't forget Morse code was a big deal.
That's where it
Uh-huh.
started.
Yeah. Tick, 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 tick,
Mhm.
tick, tick.
Yeah.
I mean, Abraham Lincoln used it to win the Civil War, and he gave it credit. That's how he won the wars, by using the telegraph.
But
and the
didn't that
Morse code.
also happen? Didn't Morse code also work in the Pay of the Pigs? The Cuban Missile Crisis? Didn't they use Morse code at some point? I'm
Oh
thinking
yeah.
of
Well, yeah. I mean, it was really a standard practice for a lot of our ships at sea to use Morse code when they were communicating with each other. It was a very cheap and reliable form of communication that that would work. Even and especially when your normal radio communications would go down.
because I was thinking that because that was, I mean, I always talk about, Gary Slaughter that was on our show. He was there at the end, when, JFK hung up and said, "That's it, we're done." And they met with the Russians and they were all in their submarines, but they're like submerged up, right? And the Russians were dying, literally. They didn't, I think they didn't even have any air. Their heaters were overdoing it. They'd been in water for days, please don't quote me on this, but it was like a rough ride for the Russians at this point. And I met with the Americans, and Gary Slaughter, who's been on our show a number of times, gets up there and he has to go out and say, "Hey, it's over. We can be friends. What can we do?" And the language, this is the thing. This is going back to the communication. The Russians are Russian. Here we are, Americans, right? And he's trying, they had to communicate in a way, what can we do to help you? Because these guys were on their deathbed, literally, the Russians. Yet they were still going for it. Like they were still going for it. And they needed bread. They had no food. So they wanted bread, cigarettes, and coffee, I believe. Those were the three things they needed. And they're like, "We have that." And he went to go tell, someone behind him, go get them. And this was the big historic thing. This was the end of it. And one of our planes went over and dropped those lights so that the photographer could take a photo of a handshake of "it's over." And it's like little firecracker things, flares. Sorry.
Not a good choice.
Flares. And the Russian guy was like, "Holy hell, we're doing this again." And he went to bolt because of that and thought it was starting up. And then because it was tenacious at the beginning because they had to tell the Russians it was fine. And the Russians are ready to kill him, and
Yeah.
everybody on theirs. And it's like, and then when that guy came over, it was like, holy whatever,
Mm.
bleep, bleep, bleep. And
Mhm.
next thing you know, they had to start all over again and not being, they're not speaking each other's language. It's not like we have Google Translate in those days. And
Right.
so, or, they didn't have pigeons out on the water. They had seagulls, but, but it happened. It's a crazy story that, God, everyone look up Gary Slaughter on Amazon and get that book because it's insane what they went through on our side and their side. And yet there was so much political stuff going. And that's the other weird thing. It's like what's going on politically and what the troops are getting are sometimes two different things. Talking about communication. I didn't say that,
Mhm.
Mike. I did, but it's true. Right? It's hard. Like now I think it's a little bit easier, but back then you didn't know what was going on in the White House,
No.
half of the time, you know, back, and especially back in the way back when, but Mike, there's so much to talk about. How do you communicate in tanks and jets? And I know we've touched on that all the different
Yeah.
shows over the years with you, but like,
Mhm.
can we do a part 2 and talk about the vehicles?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, let's do that next because we've talked a little, we've talked a lot today, but let's do part 2. Let's do, the fighter jets, go back into the archives of your books and talk about tanks. Like I know you played music in them, AC/DC, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Hell yeah. Um, Dude, you've got to, like, seriously, that adrenaline has to be there. I would blast
Mhm.
that. Um, but let's talk about communications in like all the would you say they're armored machines, like vehicles, armored vehicles? Is that what you would call them?
Yep.
Yeah.
Armored vehicles.
Okay, let's do that next. That'd be
Okay.
cool.
Sounds
Cool.
good.
Everyone, Mike's latest books, The Combat Diaries, True Stories from the Front Lines of World War II. And then Coyote Recon, The Forgotten Wars of Colonel J.D. Vanderpool. You got to go get that. Honestly, what we love about Mike's books is, we have no clue about anything, as you know, listening to our shows, we have no clue. But he brings in that human element of the people that are out there serving and the people who behind the machines too, like, fighter jets and F-14s and 15s and things I didn't even know existed. So like you learn all this history through personal stories. So everyone, whether you're in the military or not, can enjoy his books and get to understand things a little bit better than what we probably know, because of the stories of the people. So go to MikeGuardia.com. Also, Mike is on our show every first Monday for our Military Monday show, so you can keep up with us at BigBlendRadio.com. We're looking forward to more books from Mike coming out this year. He's got 25 going. He's got more in the hopper. So, Mike, yeah, you got a lot going on. Are you busy? You're writing? You're getting these proofread and done? Like
Yes,
you're on a
ma'am.
deadline? Good.
Uh-huh.
We're ready. We can't have these big gaps in between.
Not now,
Right.
Lisa.
I know. Well, we're ready for the next one. I'm just saying. All
Yes,
right,
ma'am.
Mike.
Well, almost done.
Cool.
Awesome. Just tell everybody what's the next one. Give them the little sneak peek.
Okay, sneak preview. This one is called Fire in the Hole, Tales of Combat in Vietnam with the 1st Engineer Battalion. And specifically, it is focusing on Charlie Company of the 1st Engineer Battalion and their role as combat engineers. And these are the guys who march right alongside the infantry, and they clear minefields, they lay minefields,
Damn.
and they set barbed wire obstacles and do a lot of demolitions and blow things up, especially if the enemy is about to overrun a friendly position. So yeah.
Oh, all right. So
A lot of good stories.
You can share a little bit on our next show, right? When we talk communication, because if
Course.
you're like planting bombs and stuff, like you need to have communication on that, right? There's going to be some of that. And now it also makes me think we have to have, helicopter communication, even like what you were talking about, how your feet can't look, you can't show your soles of your feet and stuff. So Yeah. I mean, yeah, how did that happen in Vietnam? All right, next time.
Mhm.
All right, everybody, cliffhanger. Thanks so much, Mike. You take care. Thank you, everyone, for
Oh,
listening.
all righty.
Take care.
Lisa and Nancy, thank you so much for having me on.
It's our
Take
pleasure.
care.
It's fun.
Thank you, Mike.